I never imagined I would be the kind of person who could betray someone I loved. But then again, I never imagined I would fall in love with my best friend's partner, either. Life has a way of testing you, challenging your morals in ways you never anticipated. It all began on a warm summer evening. My best friend Sophie had invited me to her boyfriend Tom's art exhibition. I had known Tom for a while, but always as Sophie's boyfriend, a talented artist who seemed somewhat reserved, always at a distance. As I entered the gallery, the scent of fresh paint mixed with the aroma of wine and hors d'oeuvres. Friends and admirers of Tom's work gathered around, discussing the pieces on display. Sophie, her face glowing with pride, quickly found me in the crowd and pulled me into a hug. "I'm so glad you made it," she beamed, her excitement contagious. "This is such a big night for Tom." "Of course I wouldn't miss it," I replied, smiling back. That's when I saw him. Tom was standing near one of his paintings, engaged in conversation. He looked different that evening, more confident, more vibrant. Our eyes met across the room, and for a fleeting moment, everything else faded away. He smiled, and I felt a strange flutter in my chest. What was happening? This was Tom, Sophie's boyfriend, the man she loved. I shook my head, trying to dispel the confusing thoughts that had suddenly clouded my mind. The evening continued, and I found myself drawn to Tom more and more. We chatted briefly, his soft voice and intense gaze making my heart race. With each passing minute, I felt myself sinking deeper into something I couldn't control. As the night drew to a close, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The cool evening air was a welcome relief, but it did little to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see Tom approaching. He came to stand beside me, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "Quite a night, huh?" he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there in silence, the sounds of the city around us fading into the background. After a while, Tom spoke again, his tone hesitant. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his eyes focused on the pavement. "About us." My heart skipped a beat. "Us?" He nodded, finally looking up at me. "I know it's wrong, but I can't stop thinking about you, about how it could be if things were different." His confession hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me breathless. This was Sophie's boyfriend, my best friend's partner. But even as I grappled with the implications, I couldn't deny the pull I felt toward him. Before I knew what I was doing, I closed the distance between us, and our lips met in a kiss that was as unexpected as it was inevitable. The kiss was everything, a release of pent-up tension, a culmination of emotions that had been building for weeks. His hands found their way to my waist, pulling me closer as the world around us seemed to dissolve. But then reality crashed back in. I pulled away, my breath ragged, my mind racing. "We can't do this," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. "This is wrong." Tom's expression was one of torment, a mirror of the turmoil I felt inside. "I know, but I can't stop." Guilt flooded through me, overwhelming the attraction I felt. Without another word, I turned and walked away, leaving Tom standing alone under the streetlights. The following days were torture. I avoided Sophie as much as possible, the weight of my betrayal pressing down on me. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what had happened, and the guilt gnawed at me, keeping me up at night. But despite my efforts to distance myself, I couldn't shake the memory of that kiss, couldn't forget the way Tom had looked at me, as if I was the only person in the world. And every time I thought of him, I felt the same rush of conflicting emotions, desire, shame, longing, and regret. It wasn't long before Tom reached out to me again. A text message, simple but loaded with meaning. We need to talk. We met at a quiet cafe on the edge of town, far from where anyone who knew us might see. Tom looked as tired as I felt, his usual confident demeanor replaced with something more vulnerable. "I'm sorry," he said as soon as I sat down. "I never wanted to hurt you, or Sophie." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "I know, but we did, and now I don't know how to make it right." Tom reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. The contact sent a shiver through me, and I pulled my hand back instinctively. "There's something between us," he said softly. "I felt it for a while, and I think you have too." I didn't deny it. How could I? But acknowledging it didn't make the situation any less painful. "We can't keep doing this, Tom," I said, my voice trembling. "It's not fair to Sophie. She deserves better than this." He looked down at the table, a pained expression crossing his face. "I know. But what if this is more than just a mistake? What if it's something real?" I stared at him, my heart torn between what I knew was right and what I wanted. Part of me wanted to believe him, to give in to the feelings I'd been trying so hard to suppress. But the other part, the part that still cared deeply for Sophie, couldn't let go of the guilt. "I can't do this," I said finally, standing up. "I'm sorry, Tom, but I can't keep hurting her like this." I left the cafe, tears stinging my eyes, and vowed to distance myself from both of them. For weeks, I kept my distance, trying to rebuild some semblance of normalcy in my life. I threw myself into work, avoided social gatherings, and did everything I could to forget that night. But no matter how hard I tried, thoughts of Tom lingered, and with them came a deep, gnawing guilt that wouldn't go away. One afternoon, Sophie called me, her voice sounding unusually somber. "Can we meet? There's something I need to talk to you about." My heart sank, and I knew that the truth I had been avoiding was finally catching up to me. We met at the park, the same one we used to play in as kids. Sophie looked tired, her usual sparkle dulled by something I couldn't yet name. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I know," she said quietly, "about you and Tom." My breath caught in my throat. "Sophie, She held up a hand to stop me. "I'm not here to hear excuses, or to talk about how you hurt me. I just need to know, do you love him?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. Did I love Tom? I wasn't sure. What I felt for him was intense, but it was also tangled up in guilt and confusion. "I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely audible. Sophie looked at me for a long moment, and then sighed. "I always wondered if there was something between you two. Maybe I was just too scared to see it." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. "I'm so sorry, Sophie. I never wanted to hurt you." She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly steady. "I don't know if I can forgive you, not right now. But I do know that I want you to be honest with yourself, and with me. If you think there's something real between you and Tom, then you need to figure that out." Her words left me speechless. How could she be so understanding, so willing to let me explore something that had the potential to destroy our friendship completely? "I need time," I whispered, "to figure out what I really feel." Sophie nodded. "Take it, but please don't lie to yourself about what you want." As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Guilt, relief, confusion, and something else I couldn't quite name. Sophie had given me something I didn't deserve, a chance to make sense of the mess I had created. It wasn't easy. I spent the next few weeks soul-searching, trying to untangle the web of emotions I felt for Tom. I avoided him, focusing instead on understanding myself and what I truly wanted. But in the end, I knew I couldn't move forward without facing him. One evening, after much internal debate, I found myself outside Tom's apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. He opened the door, surprised to see me standing there. "Come in," he said softly, stepping aside. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between us. Finally, I took a deep breath and spoke. "Sophie knows," I said, watching his reaction carefully. Tom's face tightened, and he nodded. "I figured she would find out eventually." She thinks we need to figure out what this is," I continued, my voice shaking slightly. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "And what do you think?" I hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been growing inside me for weeks. "I think I'm scared. Scared of what this means, scared of losing Sophie, scared of what happens next. But I'm also tired of pretending this doesn't exist." Tom reached out and gently took my hand. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But maybe this fear is telling us something we can't ignore." I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch seep into me. "I don't want to hurt Sophie anymore," I whispered. "But I also can't keep denying what I feel." He leaned in closer, his voice low and filled with emotion. "So what do we do?" I looked into his eyes and saw the same conflict I felt within myself. "We take it slow. We figure out what this really is, and we're honest with ourselves, with each other, and with Sophie." Tom nodded, and in that moment, I felt a sense of clarity. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, and there would be consequences. But for the first time, I felt like I was making the right choice. For myself, for Tom, and for Sophie. As we sat there together, holding hands, I knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge us in ways we couldn't yet imagine. But for now, in this moment, I was willing to take that risk. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to do is to be honest with yourself about what you want, even when it means facing uncomfortable truths. And sometimes that honesty leads you to places you never expected to go. And that, I realized, was worth the uncertainty, the fear, and even the potential loss. Because in the end, living a life of truth, however messy and complicated, was the only way I could truly be free.